What does regret look like? Is it the face of a man who has it all? He wore a $5,000 suit as he signed the papers, a smug smile on his lips, already tasting his new life of freedom. He thought he was dropping dead weight. He thought his wife, the woman who built him, was nothing. He laughed as he walked away. But fast forward 1 year. That same man is in a dark bar staring at his phone as tears carve tracks down his face. Why? Because the nothing he threw away just became the bride of the one man he could never touch, a billionaire. This is the story of Somi Hayes and a divorce that became her ultimate victory. The silence in the conference room at Harrison Stone Legal was thicker than the plush beige carpet. It was a $300 an hour silence designed to be intimidating final. Somi Hayes stared at the document on the mahogany table. The words "dissolution of marriage" were in an offensively bold, clean font. Across from her, Margaret Thorne clicked his pen. It was a heavy silver pen, one she'd bought him for his 35th birthday back when his money was still their money and their money was mostly the inheritance her grandmother had left her. "Just sign it, Somi," he said, his voice smooth-bored. He wasn't looking at her. He was checking the time on his Breitling Navitimer, another gift. "I have a 2 o'clock tea time at the club." Somi's lawyer, a weary-looking woman named Ms. Probate, nudged the document closer. Somi picked up the cheap office pen. Her hand was shaking not from sadness that had burned out weeks ago, but from a deep, vibrating rage. Margaret smiled. It was the smile that had once charmed her, the one he deployed to win clients at Crestview Capital, the mid-level investment firm where he was a senior vice president. Now that smile was just a baring of teeth. He was happy, genuinely, unequivocally thrilled to be getting rid of her. He'd told her as much 3 months ago in their pristine minimalist living room, the one she had decorated and he had criticized. "I'm just bored, Somi," he'd said, adjusting his cufflinks. "We're not on the same level anymore. I'm moving up. You're static. You haven't worked in 10 years. You've let yourself go. What do you even do all day besides yoga and charity lunches?" "I ran our home," she had whispered, stunned. "I managed our finances. I hosted the dinners that got you promoted. I proofread every report. And I'm grateful." He'd cut in the lie, tasting like ash. "But I've met someone. Chloe. You've met her, actually. Chloe Jennings. From marketing." Somi had felt the blood drain from her face. Chloe. 24 years old with highlights like liquid gold and a laugh that sounded like tiny sharp bells. The woman Somi had hosted for Christmas. "She understands my ambitions," Margaret continued, oblivious or uncaring. "She's hungry. She's alive. With her, I feel like I can conquer the world. With you, I feel like I'm managing a very comfortable retirement home." He called her dead weight. He called her a nice safe deposit box that stopped earning interest. Now in the lawyer's office, he was getting what he wanted. He was shedding the dead weight to make room for his new shiny asset. The settlement was insultingly small. He'd successfully argued that her inheritance had been co-mingled and used for joint living expenses while his income was the primary driver of their wealth. He was keeping the house, the car, the club membership. She was getting a one-time payout that after lawyer's fees would barely last her 2 years. She looked at him. His tailored navy suit, the silk tie, the smug confidence. He was a man she had built from scratch. She'd coached him through his MBA, funded his first major investment, and quieted her own ambitions in art history to be the perfect corporate wife. He smiled. Somi thought of that smile. She wanted to burn it into her memory, the casual cruelty of it, the absolute certainty he had that he was winning and that she was a pathetic, finished, middle-aged woman with nothing left. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Her lawyer looked at her with pity. Never again, Somi thought. I will never let anyone make me feel this small again. She signed her name, Somi M. Hayes, the Thorn, already feeling foreign. She slid the paper across the table. "Done," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. Margaret signed his name with a flourish, a self-satisfied slash of ink. He snapped the pen shut and stood pulling his jacket straight. "Well," he said to the room, "it's been a pleasure." He looked at Somi, his smile softening into something almost like pity, which was worse. "Take care of yourself, Somi. I really do hope you find something. A hobby. Maybe go back to school." He turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. He was already dialing Chloe, his laughter echoing faintly down the hall. Somi sat there for a full minute, the silence roaring back in. "Ms. Hayes," her lawyer asked gently. Somi stood up. She felt hollowed out, scoured clean. But as she walked out of that office past the ficus tree in the lobby and into the harsh afternoon sun, she didn't feel like crying. She felt cold. And for the first time in a decade, she felt a tiny, dangerous spark ignite in her chest. It was the spark of her own survival. The first 3 months were a blur of beige. Somi had moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in the Willow Creek district, a neighborhood that was charitably called Up and Coming. Her building had beige walls, a beige carpet, and a rattling air conditioner. She spent the first week in a fog unpacking boxes and living on tea and toast. The silence was overwhelming. For 10 years her life had been organized around Margaret's schedule, his dry cleaning, his client dinners, his moods. Now there was just time. Endless, gaping stretches of it. She saw them, of course. Margaret and Chloe. They were all over Instagram. Dinners at per se, weekends in the Hamptons, laughing selfies in the back of an Uber. Margaret looked younger, happier. Chloe was draped over him. Her ring a garish 3-carat diamond. Somi knew Margaret couldn't really afford flashing in every shot. They were the picture of success. Somi blocked them. She deactivated her social media. She had to erase the life she'd known to make room for whatever this was. She needed a job. The payout from Margaret was dwindling fast. She opened her laptop and stared at her resume. Somi Hayes. Education. M.A. in Art History and Curation, Yale University. Work experience. A 10-year gap. A black hole filled with charity galas and household management. The rejections piled up. Overqualified. Underexperienced. We're looking for someone with more recent digital skills. She was 38 years old and, according to the world, completely useless. One rainy Tuesday, while battling a stuck closet door, a large dusty cardboard box tumbled from the top shelf. It was labeled College Pre-Margaret. She sat on the beige carpet and opened it. Inside were textbooks, old essays, and a wave of nostalgia so strong it made her ache. She saw the woman she used to be, ambitious, passionate, articulate. A woman who could argue the nuances of the Dutch masters and the socio-political impact of postmodern sculpture. And then, at the bottom, she found a smaller wooden box. Her breath hitched. She hadn't seen it in over a decade. She opened it. Inside was a pressed Edelweiss flower, a ticket stub from the Met, and a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The letters were on heavy cream stationery, the handwriting strong and precise. They were from him, James Devereaux, her college sweetheart, her what if. They had been inseparable for 2 years at Yale. He wasn't like the other boys from Money. He was brilliant, intense, and saw the world in code and color. He was a dual major in computer science and fine art, a combination that fascinated her. They had planned a life together. She would run a gallery, he would build. Well, he was never clear what, but she knew it would be revolutionary. They would live in a loft in Soho, surrounded by books and art. Then 1 week before graduation, he vanished. His roommates said he'd packed his bags and left. A family emergency in Europe. His phone was disconnected. His emails bounced. He was just gone. Somi had been shattered. It was a grief she'd never fully processed. A year later, lost and adrift, she'd met Margaret Thorne, whose solid, predictable ambition felt like a safe harbor. She untied the ribbon, her fingers trembling. She pulled out the last letter he ever sent her, a postcard from Zurich. My dearest E. Everything is chaos. My father. It's all a mess. I can't explain yet. Don't wait for me. Please live your life. I'll find you when I can. I swear it. Forgive me. Yours, Jay. She had waited. For 6 months. But he never came. The pain of his abandonment had been a sharp, clean break so different from the slow, corrosive poison of her marriage to Margaret. She held the postcard staring at the 15-year-old ink. I'll find you when I can. A bitter laugh escaped her. He never did. He was probably a banker in Switzerland married with 3 kids. Just another ghost. But holding that letter, remembering the woman she was when he knew her, the smart, capable, passionate woman, Somi felt something shift. That woman wasn't gone. She was just buried. She looked at her laptop. Overqualified and underexperienced. Bullshit, she said to the empty room. She closed the box of memories and opened a new tab on her browser. She didn't search for executive assistant or office manager. She searched for art gallery jobs. If she was starting from the bottom, she would for the first time in her life choose the ladder she wanted to climb. The Beaumont Gallery was a small, prestigious space tucked away on a cobblestone street, known for its focus on emerging contemporary artists. It was the kind of place Somi used to dream of working in, before Margaret had convinced her that the art world was just a hobby for rich people, not a career. They were hiring an assistant to the curator. The pay was barely enough to cover her rent, but Somi didn't care. She put on her one good suit, a classic charcoal gray wool that she'd bought for herself years ago, and walked in for her interview. The curator was a woman named Ms. Diana Albright. She was in her late 60s with a severe gray bob, owlish glasses, and a reputation for being brilliant and terrifying. She looked at Somi's resume with undisguised skepticism. A 10-year gap, Ms. Hayes. She said, her voice dry as parchment. You hosted dinner parties. I did. Somi said, her voice steady. She'd practiced this. I also managed a $200,000 annual household budget, coordinated over 50 high-profile fundraising events for the New York Philanthropic League, and networked with some of the city's top donors. I can handle a budget, a schedule, and difficult personalities. Ms. Albright peered at her. This isn't a social club. This is a business. These artists depend on us. Why art? Why now? Because it's the only thing I've ever missed, Somi said simply. It's the only thing I stopped doing for someone else that I regret. Ms. Albright gestured to a large, chaotic painting on the wall. It was a mess of slashed black lines and violent splashes of crimson. What do you think of that by an artist named Kalen Voss? We're thinking of giving him a solo show. Somi looked at it. She didn't give a safe answer. She gave the real one. I think, Somi said, that it's derivative. He's desperate to be Anselm Kiefer, but he doesn't have the historical context. The brushwork is aggressive, yes, but it's undisciplined. It's anger without a purpose. You put this up and the critics will call it superficial angst. However, she pointed to a small, forgotten sculpture in the corner, a series of wires twisted around broken porcelain. That is interesting. The tension, the fragility, the kintsugi influence, that has a voice. That's where the gallery's focus should be. Ms. Albright was silent. She stared at Somi for a long, uncomfortable moment. Somi's heart hammered. She'd overstepped. She'd blown it. You'll be sorting donor files and making coffee for the first 6 months, Ms. Albright said abruptly. The pay is insulting. You start Monday at 9 a.m.? Don't be late. Somi couldn't speak. She just nodded, a smile, a real one, breaking across her face. And Ms. Hayes, the curator called as Somi turned to leave. You're right about the Voss. He's all noise. Welcome to the Beaumont. Somi walked out of the gallery feeling lightheaded. The job was small. The pay was terrible. She was by all of Margaret's standards a complete failure. But she hadn't felt this happy, this herself, in a decade. The work was grueling. Somi was the first one in and the last one out. She did, in fact, make a lot of coffee. She also reorganized the gallery's entire digital archive, charmed a prickly art critic from the Times, and discovered a glaring error in their insurance policy that saved the gallery thousands. Ms. Albright watched her, saying little, but Somi noticed she was being given more and more responsibility. She was writing exhibition notes. She was liaising with artists. 6 months into the job, Ms. Albright called her into the office. "Our fall gala is in 2 months," she announced, not looking up from a stack of papers. "It's our biggest fundraiser of the year. And this year, it's going to be a nightmare." "A nightmare?" Somi asked. "We have a new sponsor, a massive one. They're funding the entire exhibit and a new educational wing. But they're particular." Ms. Albright sighed. "They've bought out the entire new wing for a private pre-gala reception. Their security team has been here 3 times. I need someone to be the direct point of contact for their team. Someone who won't crumble." She looked up at Somi. "I want you to handle it." Somi was stunned. "Me? But what about—" "You're the only one here I trust not to," Ms. Albright said. "The company is Devereaux Holdings. The CEO's executive assistant, a woman named Ms. Thorne. No, Thorne is your ex. Apologies. Ms. Sharp. She's the one you'll be dealing with. Don't mess this up, Somi. This sponsorship secures our future." Somi's mind snagged on the name. Devereaux Holdings. It couldn't be. It was a common name. That night she went home and for the first time typed the name into Google. Her world stopped. The screen was filled with images of him. James Devereaux. He wasn't a banker in Zurich. He was a tech mogul, a recluse, the shadow of Silicon Valley who had built an empire in AI and green energy. He was worth billions. The articles described him as ruthless, brilliant, and obsessively private. He was the man from her letters, the man who had sworn he'd find her, and he was the new sponsor of her tiny gallery. Somi stared at the screen, at the face that was harder, older, and infinitely sadder than the boy she remembered. He was coming. He was going to be at the gala, and she was the one in charge of his clipboard and guest list. The 2 months leading up to the gala were a blur of logistics. Somi worked 18-hour days. She coordinated with James's security, his catering team, and his impossibly efficient executive assistant, Ms. Sharp. She never spoke to James himself. He was a phantom, an entity referred to only as Mr. Devereaux. She learned his preferences by proxy. He preferred still water-white orchids and minimal lighting. He was allergic to shellfish. He did not like to be photographed. In the back of her mind, a frantic, screaming voice asked, "Will he even remember me?" She shut it down. She had a job to do. She was Ms. Hayes, the gallery's liaison. She was professional. The night of the gala arrived. The Beaumont was transformed. Soft lights glowed, waiters moved with trays of champagne, and the city's art elite mingled. Somi, in a simple, elegant black dress she'd bought on consignment, moved through the crowd with a clipboard, her face a mask of calm efficiency. Ms. Albright squeezed her arm. "It looks wonderful, Somi. Truly." "Thank you, Diana," Somi said, using her first name at the curator's insistence. Then she got a buzz on her earpiece. "Mr. Devereaux is on site, arriving at the private entrance. 5 minutes." Somi's stomach did a painful flip. "Copy that." She went to the new wing, a beautiful glass-enclosed space that was currently empty save for the new exhibit. She stood by the door, took a deep breath, and waited. The door opened. 2 large security men entered first, scanning the room. Then he walked in. He was taller than she remembered. He wore a simple, exquisitely cut black suit, no tie. The years had sharpened his features, carving angles into his face she didn't recognize. But his eyes, they were the same, intense, intelligent, and carrying a familiar weight. He was in a quiet, serious conversation with Ms. Sharp. "And the final acquisition papers for the new piece are ready for your review," Ms. Sharp was saying. "Thank you, Amelia," he said. His voice was deeper. "Ms. Albright stepped forward, hand extended. Mr. Devereaux, Diana Albright, we are so profoundly grateful for your patronage. The new wing is magnificent. Ms. Albright, he said, shaking her hand. His smile was brief, polite. The work your gallery does is vital. My foundation is pleased to support it. He turned to survey the room, his gaze professional, assessing. And then his eyes landed on Somi, standing just behind Ms. Albright, holding her clipboard. The world stopped. He didn't just look at her. He saw her. The polite mask of the CEO shattered. His eyes widened just slightly. The blood seemed to drain from his face. Somi, he breathed. It was so quiet she barely heard it. Ms. Albright, confused, looked between them. Oh, this is my assistant curator, Somi Hayes. She's been the liaison for your team. Somi, this is Mr. Devereaux. Somi couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. James took a step toward her, ignoring everyone else in the room. His security team tensed. Somi, he said again, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. It's really you. James, she whispered. The clipboard suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I looked for you, he said, his eyes searching her face as if memorizing every line. After I got back, I looked for years. You'd graduated. You'd vanished. I got married, she said the words, feeling stupid. I changed my name to Thorne. The name hung in the air. James's expression darkened. Thorne, as in Crestview Capital. He works there, yes, Somi said, confused. How did you... They've been pitching my West Coast office for months. Aggressively, James said, his voice turning cold. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the simple dress, the clipboard, the faint shadows under her eyes. You said, got married. Past tense. I'm divorced, she said. As of this year. A universe of understanding passed between them. The 15 years of silence, the forgive me on the postcard, the fact that he had looked for her. Ms. Hayes, a new voice, sharp and unwelcome, cut through the moment. Is the press list finalized? Somi broke eye contact, turning. Yes, Diana, But she stopped. It wasn't Diana. Standing in the doorway, looking flustered and annoyed, was a junior member of the gallery staff, and behind him, shoving their way in, were Margaret Thorne and Chloe Jennings. Margaret was laughing, his face flushed. I told you, darling, I'm a sponsor. We can go where we want. Sir, this is a private reception, the staffer insisted. I'm Margaret Thorne, Crestview Capital, he boomed. We're a silver sponsor. I just want to... His voice died. He had seen her. He smirked, his eyes raking over Somi's simple dress. He was about to make a comment. She could see it, something cutting about her being the help. But then his gaze shifted, moving from Somi to the man standing protectively close to her. Margaret Thorne, the man who prided himself on knowing every power player in the city, froze. His smug smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. His jaw went slack. He knew exactly who James Devereaux was. Mr. Devereaux, Margaret stammered, his bravado vanishing like smoke. I'm Margaret Thorne, Crestview Capital. It's an honor, sir. I had no idea you'd be... we've been trying to get a meeting. He stuck out his hand. James didn't look at him. He didn't take his hand. His eyes were still on Somi. Somi, James said, his voice soft but clear in the silent room. Are these people bothering you? Chloe, draped in a low-cut red dress, finally processed the scene. She looked from the terrifyingly famous billionaire to Somi, the dowdy ex-wife. Somi, Chloe scoffed. What, you know her? She used to be his. She's a nobody. Margaret looked like he was going to be physically ill. Chloe, shut up, he hissed. James turned his head, his gaze falling on Margaret for the first time. It was not a warm look. It was the look of a king surveying an insect. "Mr. Thorne," James said, his voice lethally quiet, "you and I have nothing to discuss. Crestview's proposal was uninspired and your firm's tactics are unprofessional. My team will be blocking your calls. As for you—" He glanced at Chloe. "This is a private event. You're trespassing." He looked at his security head. "David, please escort Mr. Thorne and his guest out, and ensure they're blacklisted from this and any future Devereaux-sponsored event." "Yes, sir." "Wait." Margaret was pale sweating. "No, you don't understand, Somi. Somi, tell him, we're friends." Somi looked at her ex-husband, the man who had smiled as he signed the papers, the man who had called her dead weight. He was pleading to her. She turned back to James. "Thank you, James. Yes, they were just leaving." "Somi!" Margaret shrieked as the security guard took his arm. "You're ruining me. This is my career. You conniving—" The guards efficiently and quietly steered him and a protesting Chloe out of the room. The door clicked shut, plunging the wing back into silence. Somi was shaking. James stepped closer, his hand hovering over her arm, not quite touching. "Are you all right?" Yes. Thank you," she managed. "He's the man," James stated. "The one you married." "Yes." James's jaw tightened. "The man who let you go. He's a fool." He finally gently rested his hand on her elbow. His touch was warm, electric, and devastatingly familiar. "We have 15 years to catch up on Somi Hayes. And I'm not letting you disappear again. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow?" Somi looked into his eyes, the eyes of the boy she'd loved now in the face of a man who had just defended her without a second thought. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." The next night, a black car so quiet it seemed to glide on air picked Somi up from her beige apartment. It didn't take her to a flashy public restaurant. It took her to a private townhouse on the Upper East Side, James's home. It wasn't a sterile bachelor pad. It was filled with books, comfortable furniture, and an astonishing art collection. She recognized a small original de Kooning and a rare photograph by Francesca Woodman. "You never stopped loving it," she said, touching the frame of the photograph. "It was the one thing that reminded me of you," James said. He was standing by a fireplace looking far more relaxed than at the gala. A private chef served them a simple, perfect meal, and they talked. He told her everything. His father's sudden death, the family company he'd inherited which turned out to be a shell drowning in debt and scandal. He'd spent 5 years in a legal and financial war, working 20-hour days, living on coffee just to clear his family's name. "By the time I surfaced," he said, his voice low, "I was a different person, and you were gone. I hired a private investigator. They found your marriage certificate. Margaret Thorne. You looked happy in the photos. I told him to stop looking. I couldn't. I had no right to interfere." "I wasn't happy," Somi said quietly. "Not for a long time. I was just asleep." She told him about Margaret, about the slow erosion of her confidence, the dead weight comments, the divorce. She told him about the gallery, about Ms. Albright, about the feeling of earning her own tiny paycheck. He listened. He didn't just hear. He listened. He didn't offer to fix her problems. He didn't offer her money or a job at his company. He simply validated her. "What you did at the Beaumont," he said, impressing Diana Albright. "That's harder than impressing Forbes. She's a legend. You're brilliant, Somi. You always were. He didn't break that. He just covered it up." That dinner turned into another. And another. It wasn't a whirlwind. It was a reconstruction. They were two broken pieces from the past, fitting themselves back together. He would pick her up from the gallery, and they would walk through Central Park talking about art, about AI, about the future. He respected her job. He loved her mind. He gave the gallery an anonymous 8-figure donation earmarked for the professional development of the curatorial staff, which Ms. Albright immediately used to promote Somi to associate curator, tripling her salary. Somi moved out of the beige apartment, not into James's mansion, but into her own beautiful, bright apartment near the gallery. She was for the first time standing on her own feet. James was her partner, not her savior. Meanwhile, Margaret Thorne's life was imploding. Being blacklisted by Devereux Holdings was a death sentence. News traveled fast. Margaret was suddenly toxic. The Thorne name, which he'd been so proud of, was now associated with a massive public failure. His bosses at Crestview Capital were furious. He had not only failed to land the city's biggest whale, but he had publicly insulted him and gotten the entire firm banned from all future dealings. He was called into a meeting, the same kind of sterile, mahogany-lined conference room where he had signed his divorce papers. "We're letting you go, Margaret," his boss said, not meeting his eye. "Your position has been terminated effective immediately." But the gala. "It was my ex-wife," Margaret sputtered. "She set me up. She's with him." "We don't care," his boss said cold. "You're a liability. Security will escort you out." He was unemployed. The next day, Chloe Jennings moved out of his house. "You're a mess, Margaret," she'd said, packing her designer bags. "You lost your job. You're not the man I thought you were. I'm not tying myself to a sinking ship." She left. He was alone in the house he'd won, with a mortgage he could no longer afford. He started to drink. He would sit in the dark, scrolling, obsessed. He watched Somi's life blossom from afar. He saw paparazzi photos of her and James Devereux at the opera. She looked different. Her hair was glowing. She was wearing a stunning dark blue gown. But it wasn't the clothes. It was her stance, her confidence. She wasn't hiding behind her husband. She was standing with him. He called her. Over and over. Somi was at her desk reviewing a new artist's portfolio when her phone buzzed. Margaret Thorne. She let it go to voicemail. The message he left was a rambling, drunken slur. "Somi, baby, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. This guy, this Devereux, he's just using you. He doesn't know you. Not like I do. I can forgive you. We can fix this. Just call me back. Please. I'm falling apart, Somi." Somi listened, her face impassive. She felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just static. She pressed delete. James, who had been waiting to take her to dinner, stood in her office doorway. "Everything okay?" She looked up and smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes. "Everything is perfect." She picked up her bag and walked out, leaving the buzzing phone behind. 1 year after the divorce, Somi was in Paris. James had surprised her. He hadn't just flown her there. He had arranged for a private after-hours tour of the Musée Rodin. They were standing alone in the garden, the moonlight illuminating the kiss. "I always thought this was his masterpiece," Somi murmured, "but the world is obsessed with the thinker." "The world is obsessed with power," James said. "They forget that connection. That's the real strength." He turned to her. He wasn't wearing his CEO armor. He was just James. "I've been a fool twice in my life, Somi," he said, his voice quiet. "The first was when I let the chaos of my family swallow me when I should have fought harder to get back to you. I convinced myself I was protecting you by staying away. I was wrong." "James, you don't—" "I do," he said, taking her hands. "And the second would be if I let another day go by without fixing it." He didn't get down on one knee. It wasn't a performance. He just looked her in the eyes, his own reflecting the moonlight. "I found you again, Somi Hayes, and I am never, ever letting you go. I'm not asking you to be my wife because I need to save you. You've already saved yourself. I'm asking because without you, I'm just a man running a company. With you, I'm home." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was not a massive vulgar diamond like the one Chloe had worn. It was a flawless sapphire blue diamond bezel set in platinum, a design that was both modern and timeless. It was elegant. It was her. "Marry me, E," he whispered. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not the tears of a victim. They were the tears of a woman who had walked through fire and found a new beginning she hadn't even known was possible. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding was planned for the spring at James's private estate in Napa Valley, the Greystone Estate. It was to be an intimate 50-person affair. Ms. Albright was her maid of honor. The news, however, was impossible to keep private. Tech mogul James Devereaux to wed curator Somi Hayes, screamed the headlines on Vogue and Vanity Fair. The world was fascinated by the story. The reclusive billionaire and the brilliant unknown curator. It was a fairy tale. For one man, it was a nightmare. Margaret Thorne saw the headline on his phone. He was sitting on a bar stool at a dim, sticky bar called The Sinking Ship at 2 in the afternoon. He had sold the house at a loss. He was living in a studio apartment, drowning in debt and burning through his 401k. He clicked on the article. There she was. Somi. She was laughing, captured in a candid shot, her hand on James's arm. Her ring flashed. It was sophisticated, stunning. It made the diamond he'd bought Chloe look like cheap glass. But it was her face. She was radiant. She was the woman he'd met 15 years ago, the one who could light up a room by just talking about a painting. The woman he had systematically, deliberately, and smugly extinguished. He had thrown away a diamond, convinced it was a rock, all because he'd been temporarily blinded by a piece of glitter. He ordered another whiskey, his hand shaking. He smiled, signing the divorce papers. He muttered to himself, the irony of bitter acidic bile in his throat. Idiot. Idiot, idiot. He wasn't just jealous of James's money. He was terrified by the scale of his own mistake. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a future. He had thrown away the one person who had ever truly seen him, and in doing so, he had exposed himself as the nothing he had always secretly feared he was. The bartender slid the drink over. "Rough day, buddy." Margaret just stared at the glowing image of Somi's happy, beautiful face. He didn't answer. He just drank. The day of the wedding dawned with an impossible cinematic perfection. The Napa sky was not just blue. It was a sharp, high-definition cerulean, a vast cloudless canvas stretching over the rolling hills of Greystone Estate. James's private vineyard was a masterpiece of old-world charm and modern minimalist architecture. The scent in the air was a warm, heady mix of jasmine climbing roses and the rich, earthy smell of the sun-baked soil. In the distance, the faint, elegant sound of a string quartet tuning their instruments drifted on the breeze. This was not a spectacle. It was an occupation. 50 guests. The only 50 people in their new shared world that truly mattered were gathering in a meticulously designed garden that overlooked the valley. There were no press, no paparazzi. The privacy was the ultimate luxury. In a sun-drenched suite in the main house, a room filled not with opulent furniture, but with a staggering collection of modern art. Somi stood before a full-length mirror. She was alone. Diana had just left to take her seat. It was the one moment she had asked for. Her dress was not a confection of lace and tulle. It was a statement. A sleek architectural column of ivory silk designed by a young, ambitious artist she had discovered and personally championed at the Beaumont. The neckline was a bold, asymmetrical sweep, and the back was a daring, artistic cutout. It was the dress of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Somi looked at her reflection, and for a moment she saw a ghost. The pale, tired face of Somi Thorne, a woman who wore beige cardigans and a strained, polite smile. The woman who made herself smaller to fit in Margaret's world. The woman who had for 10 years agreed to be comfortable instead of alive. She had signed her divorce papers in a borrowed suit that felt too big. Today this silk dress felt like a second skin. A soft knock came at the door. It was Diana, back for a moment, holding a small flat box. "He's waiting," Diana said, her voice unusually thick. "And this just came for you, from James. His something new is the wedding, his something old is him. This is his something blue. Somi opened it. Inside on a bed of black velvet was not a piece of jewelry. It was a single, perfectly preserved butterfly. A morpho, its wings a shimmering iridescent blue that was almost electric. Tucked beside it was a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery, the same stationery from 15 years ago. My dearest S. The first time I saw you, you were in the art library arguing that the kintsugi wasn't about fixing what was broken, but about making the break a part of the beauty. You saved me then, and you've saved me now. I've been waiting 15 years to see you walk toward me. The wait is over. Yours, J. Somi's breath hitched. She had told him that story about the broken porcelain and the twisted wires at her interview with Diana. The sculpture in the gallery corner. He had remembered. He had connected her past to her present. That man. Diana said, her eyes misting as she looked at the butterfly. Sees you in color, Somi. Not in shades of gray. Now let's go. You have a billionaire to marry. Somi laughed, the sound clear and bright in the quiet room. She picked up her bouquet, a simple structural arrangement of white calla lilies, and walked toward her future. 500 miles away, in a city that had long since spit him out, Margaret Thorne woke to the sound of a neighbor's television blaring a game show. His studio apartment was a gray, claustrophobic box. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, unwashed clothes, and the lingering odor of burnt toast from 2 days ago. A single grimy window looked out onto a brick wall. He sat on the edge of his mattress, which was just a mattress on the floor, and ran a shaking hand over his face. His beard was patchy, his eyes a road map of burst blood vessels. That morning he had been fired from a temp job data entering for a logistics company. Thorne, you're done, his supervisor, a kid half his age, had said, not even bothering to look up from his screen. You've been here 3 weeks and your error rate is at 40%. Plus you smell like a distillery. We're not paying you for today. Just get out. He was out of money. He'd known this was coming. He picked up his phone, his one remaining possession of value, and opened his banking app. His hand trembled not from the hangover, but from the dread. Current balance, $147.38. He was less than nothing. He was in the red. The house was gone, sold at a catastrophic loss. The Breitling was gone, pawned for a fraction of its worth. Chloe was gone, vanished back into the city's nightlife, and had blocked his number after he'd left her a series of increasingly desperate drunken voicemails. He was a failure. By every metric he had ever worshipped, money, status, power, he was an absolute abject failure. An old familiar rage bubbled up, sour as bile. It was their fault. It was Somi's fault for being so conniving. It was Devereaux's fault for blacklisting him for using his power like a bully. It was Crestview's fault for being so spineless. He had built an empire. He had been a senior vice president. He had mattered. And they had taken it all away. His thumb, acting of its own accord, navigated to his web browser. To the Vogue homepage, a site he now visited with the obsessive, self-loathing addiction of a man picking at a septic wound. He knew what today was. The date had been burned into his memory. And there it was. The headline posted only minutes ago. First look inside reclusive billionaire James Devereaux's wedding to curator Somi Hayes. Margaret's heart gave a single painful thud. He had to see. He had to know. He had to feel the pain because it was the only thing left that felt real. He tapped the link. Somi stepped out into the sunshine. The string quartet shifted from Bach to a soft instrumental version of a song she and James had both loved in college. She walked alone. It had been her choice. No one was giving her away. She saw the 50 faces all turned toward her. Diana smiling through her tears. The young artists she now mentored, their expressions full of awe. James's mother, a formidable, graceful woman who had embraced her like a long-lost daughter. And then she saw him, James, standing at the end of the aisle under an arch of white roses. He was not the shadow of Silicon Valley. He was not the ruthless CEO. He was just James. His eyes locked on her, his face stripped bare of everything but a profound, overwhelming love. As she drew closer, she could see the raw relief in his gaze, as if he too couldn't believe this was real. He had waited 15 years. The wait was over. She reached him, and he took her hands. His were warm and steady. "You came," he whispered, a private joke that was just for them. "I always do," she whispered back. Their vows were not the canned traditional script. They had written them. They were a promise. James spoke first, his voice clear and strong, echoing slightly in the perfect silence. "I promised once in a letter that I would find you. It took me 2 decades, and it was the single greatest failure of my life. Somi, you are my true north. You are my partner, my conscience, and my home. I will not spend another day of my life without you." Somi looked into his eyes, the eyes she had loved at 20 and loved even more now. "I was a house with no one inside," she said, her voice full, not trembling. "I was a story someone else had written. You didn't save me, James. You saw me. You held my hand and reminded me that I could write my own story. You reminded me that I was already home. I am yours, but finally I am also my own. And I love you. I do." "I do," he said. The kiss was not a performance for the crowd. It was a seal. A quiet, definitive, and total claiming. It was the closing of a 15-year-old wound. The 50 guests erupted not just in applause but in a wave of pure, concentrated joy. Margaret stared at the phone, his world shrinking to the 6-inch screen. Photo 1. The Greystone Estate. A sprawling yet elegant complex of stone and glass overlooking a sea of green vines. It was worth more than Crestview Capital's entire downtown office. Photo 2. The guests. He recognized them. A Pulitzer Prize-winning author, the chief art critic for the Times, a tech founder whose company was a household name. This wasn't a wedding, it was a power summit, the world he had begged to get into. Photo 3. Somi, walking down the aisle. The phone almost slipped from his hand. It wasn't the dress. It wasn't the setting. It was her face. She was smiling, her eyes fixed on someone at the end of the aisle. It was a smile of such profound, unfiltered joy that it was almost violent. A smile of total trust, of absolute certainty. A cold, sick dread pooled in his stomach. She never looked at me like that, not even at their own wedding. He remembered that day now. She had been nervous, her smile thin, her eyes darting. He'd thought it was just bridal jitters. He realized with a jolt that felt like an electric shock that it had been doubt. Photo 4. The kiss. Him, this Devereaux, his hand on her face, protective, possessive. Her hands gripping his jacket. It was intimate. It was real. Photo 5. The reception. This was the one that broke him. It was a candid shot. Somi, her head thrown back in a full, unrestrained laugh, a laugh he hadn't heard in a decade. She was in the arms of her new husband, who was watching her not like a prize but like the center of his universe. And beneath it the caption that ended the world. Somi Hayes, now Devereaux, in a custom gown by artist-designer Anna Taylor, celebrates with her husband, billionaire philanthropist James Devereaux. Somi Devereaux. The name hit him like a physical blow. Devereaux. She wasn't Thorne anymore. He hadn't just been replaced. He had been erased. The name he had given her, the identity he had imposed on her, was gone, shed like an old, useless skin. She had upgraded in a way that was so total, so absolute, that it rewrote their entire history. He dropped the phone onto the stained carpet. He flashed back with agonizing clarity to that conference room. The mahogany table, his $5,000 suit, his smug, confident smile as he signed the papers. He smiled. He had smiled. He had been happy to get rid of her. He remembered his words. I'm bored, Somi. You've let yourself go. Dead weight. Take care of yourself, he'd said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. Maybe find a hobby. A sound clawed its way out of his throat, a dry hacking noise that was half laugh, half sob. A hobby, he whispered to the empty gray room. The arrogance, the sheer cosmic stupidity of it. He hadn't just thrown away a wife, he had thrown away the quarry. The woman who had funded his MBA. The woman who had proofread every report. The woman who had networked, smiled, and hosted the dinners that got him promoted. The woman with a mind sharp enough to impress a legend like Diana Albright. A mind he had tried to dull and file down because it made him feel small. And James Devereaux, a real giant, a man with the kind of power Margaret had only pretended to have had seen her. He hadn't seen dead weight. He had seen the diamond. Margaret hadn't just been blind. He had actively, deliberately, and smugly gouged out his own eyes, all because he'd been momentarily dazzled by a 24-year-old piece of glitter. He slid off the mattress, his back hitting the cold drywall. He was shaking. He looked around the squalid room at the monument to his failure. This was it. This was the freedom he had wanted. This was the grand prize. He thought of her face, radiant, joyful. Somi Devereaux. The smile he wore signing the divorce papers had been the smile of a fool celebrating his own execution. Margaret Thorne, the man who had it all, the man who had thrown it all away, put his head in his hands. And for the first time, not for his job, not for his money, not for his lost status, but for the one good, true, brilliant thing he had possessed and deliberately destroyed, he cried. He wept, his shoulders shaking ugly, choking sobs that echoed in the tiny, empty room. He cried for himself, for his loss, for the terrifying, irreversible finality of his own colossal mistake. In Napa, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in strokes of apricot and violet. The dinner was over, and a small band was playing soft jazz. Somi and James had slipped away, standing on a stone balcony that overlooked the vineyards, the lights of the party a warm glow behind them. "Happy Mrs. Devereaux?" James asked, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into his embrace, her eyes on the darkening hills. She wasn't thinking of Margaret. She wasn't thinking of the divorce, or the beige apartment, or the 10 lost years. She was just present. She thought of the kintsugi, the broken pieces glued back together with gold. She wasn't just fixed, she was stronger, she was more beautiful. "I'm home," Somi said, turning in his arms to face him. He smiled and kissed her a long, slow kiss that tasted like champagne and promises kept. She was finally and completely free. In the end, this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about worth. Margaret didn't see Somi's value, so he lost her. But more importantly, Somi herself had forgotten her own value. The divorce, as painful as it was, wasn't an ending. It was a wake-up call. It forced her to rebuild her life for herself. James didn't save her. He arrived after she had already started to save herself. He was the partner who was worthy of the woman she had become. Margaret's tragedy wasn't just losing her to a billionaire. It was realizing far too late that the woman he'd treated like nothing was in fact everything. What did you think of Somi's journey? Have you ever had a moment in your life that felt like an ending only for it to become your real beginning? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories about life, love, and the twists of fate that make us stronger, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss the next story. Thank you for watching.